Look at the front of your house. There's a number on it. Maybe it's on the mailbox. Maybe it's nailed to the siding above the porch. Maybe it's a brass plate screwed into the door frame. You've seen it 10,000 times. You've typed it into online forms, recited it over the phone, printed it on envelopes. You have never once wondered who decided what that number would be, or why that number and not another, or when exactly your home stopped being a place people recognized by sight and became a coordinate in a government database. Because your street address didn't always exist. For the vast majority of American history, houses had no numbers, streets had no names, and the idea that every building in the country would carry a unique numerical identifier assigned by a central authority, plotted on a grid and linked to your tax records, your census data, your utility accounts, your insurance policies, your credit score, and your 911 dispatch location, would have been unthinkable to most Americans who ever lived. This is the story of how that changed. And like everything else in this series, the answer involves a census, a war, a system designed for government tracking, and a population that was never asked whether it wanted to be found. If this is the kind of history you never learned in school, subscribe. This channel exists to find it. I came to this through the post office. I was researching early mail delivery in America, trying to understand how letters reached people in a country that had no standardized addresses. The answer is simpler than you would expect, and stranger. For the first 70 years of the Republic, they mostly did not reach people. Or rather, the mail went to a post office, and the people came to it. The first post office in the American colonies was established in a Massachusetts tavern in 1639. By 1789, when the new Constitution placed the Postmaster General under the executive branch, there were 75 post offices and roughly 2,400 miles of post roads along the eastern seaboard. The system was designed to carry mail from post office to post office. That was it. If you wanted your letter, you walked to the post office and asked for it. If you lived in a rural area, sometimes a postmaster might ride out to deliver something important. Abraham Lincoln, before he was president, served as postmaster of New Salem, Illinois, and was known to carry letters in his hat to deliver to people he encountered during the day. Nobody came to your door. Nobody needed to know where your door was. Philadelphia was the first American city to attempt anything resembling an address system. In 1785, the city published its first directory, listing heads of household by their approximate location, not by number. You would look up a name and find something like 3rd and Chestnut. Some listings were even vaguer. Benjamin Franklin's entry read simply, Market Street, the entire length of Market Street. That was the address of the most famous man in Philadelphia. In 1785, the directory editor John McPherson tried to impose a numbering scheme copied from Paris and London. He used what was called the horseshoe method. Numbers started at one corner of a block, ran down one side, and came back up the other, clockwise. So the lowest number on a block ended up directly across the street from the highest. If you were looking for number 1, it might be staring at number 47. The system was confusing from the start, but it was at least an attempt. Most American cities did not bother with even that much. Then came the census. In 1790, the United States conducted its first national population count, mandated by Article 1 of the Constitution. Census takers needed to catalog every household in the country. In Philadelphia, the man responsible for overseeing this immense task was Clement Biddle, 1st Marshal of Pennsylvania. Biddle had a problem. The horseshoe numbering was a disaster for systematic record-keeping. You could not efficiently canvass a city block by block when the numbers snaked around in circles. So Biddle invented something new. He placed ODD numbers on the north and east sides of each street, and even numbers on the south and west. Numbers on both sides moved in the same direction, ascending together. A stranger could now find, as Biddle said, any house whose street and number is known. That was 1790. The census created the address. The government needed to count you, so the government needed to find you, so the government needed to number your house. The numbering was not designed to help you receive packages or give directions to friends. It was designed to make you legible to the state. And it almost did not stick. Because Biddle's system, sensible as it was, had no enforcement mechanism. The city government did not regulate house numbers. Property owners controlled their own labels. As buildings were demolished and new ones built on vacant lots, properties ended up numbered in the order they were constructed rather than by their position on the street. Within a few decades, there were houses in Philadelphia sharing the exact same address but standing half a mile apart. The system had decayed into chaos, and nobody with authority had stepped in to fix it. It took another 66 years, another demographic crisis, and another government mandate. In 1854, the Consolidation Act merged Philadelphia's surrounding boroughs into a single expanded city, growing its territory from 2 square miles to nearly 130 square miles. Suddenly, the city had dozens of duplicate street names, overlapping numbering schemes, and no coherent way to locate any property within its own borders. 2 years later, in 1856, a councilman and inventor named John Masher introduced what would become the most influential addressing system in American history. Masher's design was elegant. He reserved 100 numbers for every city block. The block between 2nd and 3rd Streets would contain addresses in the 200s. The block between 3rd and 4th would contain addresses in the 300s. Odd numbers on one side, even on the other, ascending in the same direction. If someone told you their address was 1420 Chestnut, you knew immediately they lived between 14th and 15th Streets on the south or west side. No directory needed. No asking for directions. The number itself contained a map. The system was published in the Public Ledger on September 16, 1856. Masher described the existing situation as deplorably confused. The city adopted the plan. Overnight, every address in Philadelphia changed. Properties that had been 146 Chestnut Street for decades suddenly became something entirely different. Businesses that had printed their addresses on signs, letterheads, advertisements, and invoices had to change everything. People who had lived at the same number their entire lives woke up one morning with a new identity imposed by the city council. Some resisted, but the system worked. Other cities copied it. New York, Chicago, New Orleans. Within decades, it became known simply as the Philadelphia system, the decimal system, the grid that Americans now take as a natural feature of the built environment, as though streets had always been numbered this way, as though houses had always carried coordinates. They had not. John Masher invented your address in 1856, and most Americans alive at the time resented it. But the system remained optional in practice for millions of Americans until the Civil War forced the issue. Here is what happened. Before 1863, a postage stamp only paid for the delivery of mail from one post office to another. If you wanted your letter, you went to the post office and picked it up. In some larger cities, you could pay an extra 2 cents and a private company would deliver it to your door. But for the vast majority of Americans, the post office was a destination, not a service. Then the war started, and suddenly, hundreds of thousands of women were lining up at post offices across the North, waiting for hours in the cold, desperate for word from husbands and sons fighting in Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia. A postal clerk in Cleveland named Joseph Briggs watched these lines day after day during the winter of 1862, and he convinced his superiors to try something new: deliver the mail to people's homes, for free. Congress agreed. On March 3, 1863, Congress passed an act establishing free city mail delivery, effective July 1st, in any city where postal revenue could cover the cost. With that law came a requirement that had never existed before in American history. For the first time, people mailing letters had to include a street address. The requirement was widely ignored at first. Letter carriers found envelopes addressed to the residents halfway between 3rd and 4th with the 2 broken windows and a crumbling chimney. Mark Twain, who conducted a decades-long feud with the Postal Service, once addressed a letter to a friend in Buffalo with no street name and no number, just a physical description, the man's occupation, his approximate height, and the note that he was a tall man, old but without any gray hair, and used to be handsome, with a postscript adding he was a little bald on the top of his head. The letter arrived. But the era of description-based addressing was ending. By the end of the first year of free delivery, 65 cities employed 685 carriers. By 1880, 104 cities offered the service. By 1900, 796 cities did. Each city that adopted the service had to meet requirements: sidewalks, crosswalks, named and lit streets, and numbered houses. The postal system did not just deliver mail, it imposed infrastructure. It required communities to formalize themselves into a grid that a carrier could walk efficiently. In 1896, the system expanded into rural America with the introduction of rural free delivery. Farmers who had traveled miles to a post office could now have mail brought to their doors, but only if they installed a mailbox at the road. And only if their road had a name. And only if their house had an identifier the carrier could use. The countryside was being numbered, road by road, house by house, and the numbering was never about convenience. It was about access. The government needed to reach you. The postal system was the instrument. The address was the mechanism. Then came the zip code in 1963. It was a 5-digit system that sliced the country into zones, designed not for people but for machines, for sorting equipment that could process mail faster than any human. Your address was no longer just a location. It was an input in an automated routing system. ZIP stands for Zone Improvement Plan. Improvement of the system's efficiency, not yours. And then came the final transformation. On February 16, 1968, the first 911 call was placed in Haleyville, Alabama. The emergency dispatch system seemed straightforward at first. You call, you say where you are, help comes. But as the system expanded, a massive problem emerged. In rural America, millions of properties had no standardized addresses. Farms went by rural route box numbers. Entire counties had unnamed roads. If you called 911 from a farmhouse in West Virginia, you might say you lived on the old Miller Road past the creek, and the dispatcher would have no way to translate that into a location for an ambulance. Enhanced 911, which automatically displays a caller's location on the dispatcher's screen, required something the country still did not have: a universal addressing system. Every structure needed a physical street address. Every road needed a name. Every property needed a number that corresponded to its actual geographic position. The result was the largest addressing project in American history, and it happened not in the 1800s, but in the 1990s and the 2000s. County by county, state by state, government sent teams with GPS units into the countryside to name roads, number houses, and register every structure in a digital database. In North Dakota, a county emergency coordinator named Cornard Burkle invented an entirely new system in 1988, dividing the state into a mile-by-mile grid and assigning addresses based on distance from a central axis. His system was adopted statewide and then replicated across the country. In West Virginia, the situation was so severe that parts of the state had no addresses at all well into the 2000s. After Verizon was caught inflating rates in the state and reached a legal settlement, $15 million was allocated to create nearly 500,000 new street addresses. Residents who had never had an address in their lives were suddenly assigned one. Some embraced it, others resisted. County coordinators reported that residents chose street names like Get R Done Drive and Beer Can Alley. Others simply refused to post their numbers, understanding instinctively what the address really represented. A mechanism for the state to find them, to tax them, to locate them in a database. And then there's Carmel by the Sea, 1 square mile on the California coast, population 3,200. For over a century, this town had no street addresses. Houses had names instead of numbers, homes called Neverland, and almost heaven and sea castle and faux chateau. If you wanted to find someone, you'd be told they lived on the west side of San Antonio Street, 3 houses south of 12th Avenue. The town had no sidewalks in residential areas, no streetlights, no mailboxes, no house-to-house delivery. Residents picked up their mail at the downtown post office, where running into neighbors became a daily social ritual. The post office was not just a mail facility, it was the town square. In 1929, the city passed a zoning law declaring that business development should forever be subordinate to the residential character of the community. The refusal of addresses was part of that character. Carmel deliberately chose not to be numbered. It chose to remain a place where you navigated by landmarks and descriptions and relationships, the way every American community had navigated before the census, before the postal system, before the 911 grid. But in July 2024, after years of debate intensified by the pandemic and the explosion of online deliveries, the Carmel City Council voted 3-2 to assign street addresses. Residents had complained that ambulances went to the wrong houses, that banks refused to open accounts without a standard address, that utility hookups and cell phone plans required a format the town could not provide. One resident told the council she had to stand in the street and wave down delivery trucks because drivers could not find her home. The vote was bitterly contested. Residents threatened to secede from California. One man told the council they were destroying the town's character, day by day and week by week. A woman argued that the police knew where everyone lived, and that the sweetness of this little town depended on its refusal to become just another town along the coast. She lost. The numbers are being assigned now. I keep thinking about Carmel because it was the last holdout, the final American community that tried to resist the logic of the grid. And it held on for over a century, which means it preserved something that every other town in America has forgotten. What it felt like before addresses existed. Before your house was a data point. Before your location was a line item in a government database linked to your tax record, your census entry, your utility account, your insurance policy, your credit report, and your 911 dispatch zone. Consider what an address actually is. It is not a description of where you live. It is an assignment. A number chosen by a municipal authority, placed on your property, and registered in systems you did not create and do not control. It is the mechanism by which every institution in your life locates you. Without it, you cannot receive mail. You cannot open a bank account. You cannot register to vote. You cannot enroll your children in school. You cannot call for an ambulance and have it find you. Your address is not optional. It is the prerequisite for participating in modern American life. And the entire system traces back to a census taker in Philadelphia in 1790 who needed a better way to count people. Then a councilman in 1856 who turned the count into a grid. Then a postal law in 1863 that required the grid on every envelope. Then a 911 system in the 1960s that required the grid on every road. Then a GPS-equipped team in the 2000s that walked the last unnamed hollows of West Virginia and pinned a number to every structure they could find. The same decade that replaced local time with railroad time. The same era that replaced the community identity with census documentation. The same century that replaced local policing with professional departments and local food knowledge with federal regulation. And now, the same pattern that replaced knowing your neighbors by name and navigating by the oak tree at the bend in the road was a 5-digit number assigned by a county coordinator with a GPS unit. That was not coincidence. It was a pattern. And the pattern always moves in one direction, from local to central, from description to number, from community knowledge to institutional database, from a system that required you to know people to a system that only requires you to know their coordinates. Your street address is not a service. It is a technology of legibility, a tool that makes populations visible to the institutions that govern them. The census needed it to count you. The postal system needed it to reach you. The tax assessor needed it to bill you. The 911 system needed it to locate you. Every system that touches your life passes through that number on your house, and every one of those systems was designed not for your convenience, but for its own. Carmel understood this. For 100 years they said no. They said, "We know where we live. We know our neighbors. We'll pick up our own mail. Leave us alone." And for 100 years the system left them alone because they were small enough and wealthy enough and stubborn enough to hold the line. Then Amazon came, and the ambulance couldn't find the house, and the bank wouldn't open the account. And the last town in America without addresses voted to become like every other town. The number is on your house now. It has always been there for as long as you can remember. But it hasn't always been there. Someone put it there. Someone decided what it would be. Someone registered it in a system you've never seen, connected it to databases you've never accessed, and made it the key that unlocks every service and obligation in your civic life. Your address is not your home. Your address is your location in their system. And once you see that distinction, you cannot unsee it. If you've made it this far, you already understand the pattern. Subscribe, because the next one goes deeper.